The mud was swallowing the machine. Not slowly, not politely, it was devouring it. The $500,000 drilling rig groaned as another inch of its steel frame disappeared into the soaked prairie field. Hydraulic arms strained, tires spun uselessly, carving deeper trenches into the earth. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the damage had already been done. 30,000 pounds of cutting-edge engineering, trapped in mud that didn't care how much it cost. An engineer slammed his clipboard against the side of the truck. "Stop the winch! Stop it!" The steel cable snapped loose with a violent recoil. The crowd stepped back. Someone muttered quietly, "This thing's not coming out." And the worst part? They were running out of daylight and patience. Because that machine wasn't just expensive, it was the centerpiece of a major project. Deadlines, contracts, investors. Every minute it sat stuck in that field was costing someone serious money, and every attempt to pull it out was failing. The situation was getting worse. 3 pickup trucks had already tried. They lined them up nose to tail with a heavy-duty tow chain. Engines roared, tires screamed, mud flew everywhere. And the drilling rig? It didn't move an inch. The trucks did. They slid sideways, digging themselves into the same mess. Someone cursed loudly. A mechanic kicked the ground. "This soil's like glue." Another engineer checked the depth of the ruts. Rig sunk almost 2 feet now. That number made everyone go quiet, because the deeper it sank, the harder it would be to pull free. The foreman rubbed his face. "Call the heavy tow." The big machines arrived. 2 hours later, the real muscle showed up. A massive industrial recovery truck rolled into the field. Bright orange, 6 axles, a hydraulic boom designed to pull semi-trucks out of ditches. One of the engineers folded his arms confidently. "That'll do it." The tow operator climbed out, surveyed the situation, and nodded slowly. "Yeah, we'll get her." Chains clanked, steel hooks locked into place. The engine roared to life. Hydraulics whined. The cable tightened. The mud trembled. Everyone held their breath. For a moment, it looked like the rig moved, just a little, maybe an inch. But then, the recovery truck's tires began spinning. The operator backed off the throttle. Tried again, more power. The cable screamed under tension. The drilling rig groaned and sank another inch. The operator shut it down. Silence. One of the engineers whispered, "You've got to be kidding." Now, let me pause here, because this is the moment when everyone believed the situation had crossed the line from difficult to impossible. They had modern machines, hydraulic systems, professional operators, heavy steel equipment designed exactly for situations like this. And yet, nothing was working. The mud wasn't just mud. It was dense prairie clay, waterlogged, sticky. It created a suction force around the wheels and frame of the drilling rig. Think of it like trying to pull a boot out of deep mud. Now multiply that by 30,000 pounds. That's what they were dealing with, and modern machines weren't solving it. That's when someone noticed the tractor. Parked quietly at the edge of the field, faded green paint, rounded hood, rust freckles across the steel. An old tractor, the kind farmers used decades ago. One of the engineers squinted at it. "Whose tractor is that?" A young field tech shrugged. "Belongs to the farmer who owns the land." Another engineer laughed. "Well, it's not helping us." They went back to arguing about tow angles and anchor points. But someone else had been watching the entire situation from the fence line. An older man, hands resting on the wooden post, quiet, patient, listening. His name was Harold, and that tractor, it was his. Let me tell you about Harold. Harold had farmed that land for 40 years, before GPS tractors, before automated combines, before half of the engineers standing there had even been born. He had seen tractors buried to the axle, grain trucks stuck during harvest storms, plows that refused to budge. He had pulled things out of mud that machines said couldn't move.
But Harold wasn't the type to interrupt, so he waited. He watched the engineers debate, watched them bring out diagrams, watched them argue about pulling angles, and finally, he spoke, quietly. "You boys might be pulling the wrong way." No one answered him first. They were busy calculating cable loads. But Harold tried again. "You're trying to lift it out." That got the foreman's attention. "What's wrong with that?" Harold shrugged. "Clay like this, you don't fight it straight up." One of the engineers chuckled. "And what would you do?" Harold pointed towards the tractor. "I'd drag it sideways first." The engineer actually laughed out loud. "With that?" He gestured towards the tractor. "Sir, that machine's older than our project manager." Another joined in. "That thing probably has half the horsepower of the tow truck." Someone muttered, "Yeah, maybe in 1950. The group chuckled. Harold didn't argue. He simply said, "Maybe," and turned to walk back towards his tractor. Now what happened next is important, because the foreman watched Harold leave, and something about the man's calm confidence made him hesitate. They had already tried everything else. The tow truck had failed, the pickups had failed, the drilling rig was sinking deeper by the minute. So the foreman called out, "Hold on a second." Harold stopped. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Harold pointed towards the stuck machine. "You're trying to lift the weight of the rig and the mud holding it." The engineers nodded. "Right." Harold continued, "But if you break the suction first, you don't have to lift all of it." One engineer frowned. "So you're saying drag it sideways?" "Just enough to loosen it." The engineer crossed his arms. "And you think that tractor can do that?" Harold smiled faintly. "Only one way to find out." The skepticism was thick. The engineers gathered near the tractor. Up close it looked even older. Faded decals, manual levers, no computer screens, no sensors. One engineer whispered to another, "This is ridiculous." Another said quietly, "If this breaks our tow points." The finally sighed. "We're already stuck." He looked at Harold. "Fine, show us." The old tractor starts. Harold climbed into the seat, turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then settled into a deep, steady rumble. Not loud, not powerful, but strong. The kind of sound machines make when they've worked their entire life. Harold backed it into position, hooked a thick chain to the drilling rig's frame. Not the front, not the rear, the side. An engineer shook his head. "This is insane." Harold just eased the tractor into gear. The field went quiet. Everyone watched. The tractor crept forward, slow, deliberate. The chain tightened. The engine deepened its rumble. Mud shifted slightly under the drilling rig. One engineer leaned forward. "Did it just move?" Another scoffed. "No way!" But Harold kept pulling. Not fast, not aggressive, but just steady. Then something strange happened. The rig tilted slightly, just a few degrees, and with a thick, wet sound, the mud released its grip. Schlarp! The entire drilling rig shifted sideways, nearly 6 inches. The engineers froze. "What?" Harold stopped, backed up, repositioned, and pulled again. This time the rig slid almost a full foot. Now the suction seal was broken. The mud wasn't gripping the frame anymore. The foreman yelled, "Hook the tow truck back up!" Chains clanked again. The recovery truck tightened its cable. The operator gave it power. And suddenly, the drilling rig rolled free like it had never been stuck at all. The field exploded with reactions. Someone shouted, "No way!" Another engineer stared at the tractor. "You've got to be kidding me!" The tow operator climbed down slowly, looked at Harold, then at the tractor, then back at the rig. "Well, I'll be damned." Harold shut off the engine, climbed down, and wiped his hands from the mud. The foreman walked over, shook his head in disbelief. "How did you know that would work?" Harold shrugged. "Seen it before." The real lesson. Now let me explain why Harold's idea worked. When heavy equipment sinks into wet clay, it doesn't just get stuck because of weight, it gets stuck because of suction. The mud forms a seal around the tires and frame of the machine. Trying to lift the machine straight up means fighting both gravity and suction. That's thousands of pounds of resistance. But when Harold pulled the rig sideways, he broke the seal first. Once air entered the gaps in the mud, the suction disappeared. Suddenly, the machine only had to overcome its weight, and that's something the tow truck could easily handle. Modern machines had the power, but Harold had the experience. The aftermath. The engineers stood around the drilling rig like they were looking at magic. One of them finally approached Harold. "Sir, I owe you an apology." Harold tilted his head. "For what?" "For laughing." Harold chuckled. "Don't